Hello everyone, I'm here today to do my wrap-up for September, and as you can see it's getting to winter, so I don't have light anymore. I hope this works. It was just the easiest way for me to film this right now, but I have read 13 books in September, which is quite a good number, and I have now only 16 books left in my Storygraph TBR, which is exactly where I want it to be. So I'm very happy about that. So the first book I read in September was The Summer War by Naomi Novik, which is a novella, fantasy novella about these two siblings. They're trying to figure out how they want to live their lives. They are two brothers and a sister, and the oldest brother, who is kind of the golden child, decides to leave the castle for his own reasons, and the daughter, which is the middle child, is kind of heavily emotionally affected by it, and then the youngest child is kind of the one that no one cares about. And when the oldest child leaves, he suddenly becomes the heir, and the siblings have to figure out what kind of relationship they want to have with each other. It was fine. I like the story, I like the characters, I like the fact that there was no this super romantic plot thing going on that most fantasies these days have. However, I did feel that the story was like the building of the world and the plot-wise thing was fairly standard, and I also felt like the pacing was kind of off. It had a lot of info dumping at the beginning, and then it got up the pace, and the way that things were revealed was not like a pace that works very well. So yeah, it was a mixed bag. I'm happy I read it. It's a novella, so it's not a really big time commitment. The next book I read was Dazzling by Chikodili Emelumadu. I hope I didn't butcher that too much. This book kind of follows two girls that for different reasons have to fight in the world that they live in, and one of those reasons were for things that happened to their parents, their dads, and it talks a lot about what the right and wrong is and how flimsy those limits are. The things that they do and the reasons they do them are things that I think everyone can relate to, but the things that they do are not always good. So it has a lot of moral discussions on that sense, and I think that was interesting. There's also this magical realism element of converting into animals, or spirit animals sort of thing, which I also enjoyed, but I did think that the characters, I strongly prefer one over the other, and they're going back and forth. It was not clear how they were connected for a really long time in the book, so I was just, that back and forth made me lose a little bit the focus of the book, and I think a lot of people in the book club felt similarly. So again, it was good. I'm glad I read it, but it's not a favorite. The next book that I finished was Nimona by ND Stevenson, and I really enjoyed this. This was just a lot of fun. It's a graphic novel, and I really like the art, and it's about, so Nimona is this girl, and she appears one day in the house of this guy, which is supposed to be the anti-hero of the world, and this is supposed to be the hero of the world, and we discovered that they had somewhat of a previous relationship with each other, and they were in love and all of that, and then something happened and brought them apart, and then that's when he became the anti-hero. And we also see how those labels can be manipulated, and what the objectives of each of these two factions are actually, and how Nimona kind of, so this character exposes those things, and there's also like a mystery going on about who she really is. She's this shapeshifter that can really do things that nobody else can ever do, and so there is a lot of questions about where she comes from and how can she do these things. I really enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun. It's very humorous, and I really enjoyed that too. There are it's fun because it's also kind of medieval, but at the same time they are like in the real world. They have computers and people around them look kind of the same, and then they have like board games and video games and things like that. And yeah, I really enjoyed the humor. I really enjoyed the story, and I thought it was very well executed and very fun. The next book I read was Tress of the Emerald Sea by Brandon Sanderson. This is part of the Cosmere, but it's like standalone, and it's supposed to be quite a different writing style from his other books. And we follow Tress, who is this like completely normal girl in a completely normal little island that nobody cares about, and she is supposed to going to be a completely normal person, and at some point the boy that she's in love with has to go away because her father is this very important person, and so he wants to marry the son to someone of importance, and his plan is to bore everyone to death until he's allowed to marry Tress, but that backfires, and so Tress goes into this adventure trying to find him and sort of save him, and in that process it kind of makes fun, and it's also very humorous, and it exposes how being normal and having common sense is not such a normal thing to have, and it was fun. I enjoyed it. I really enjoyed especially the writing style. I think the story was not particularly amazingly new, but I think that was the point. I think he was trying to make a commentary on the genre by exposing a normal standard plot, fantasy plot, in a very different light and a very different narration style. The narrator does address the reader sometimes directly, which it works really well in this book, so I really enjoyed this one as well. The next book that I read was Mary Pppins by P.L. Travis, and this is the illustrated edition, and this was fine. It is nostalgic because Mary Pppins is one of the VHS that we had when I was little, and so we watched it many times, and there are significant changes in the movie, starting by the fact that this family is not supposed to be very rich. They have 4 children instead of 2, for example. Maybe it was the other 2 are babies, so maybe it was difficult to cast babies in the movie, I don't know, but yeah, there were supposed to be 4. And also things like when they go inside this picture in the street, it's supposed to be just Bert and Mary Pppins, and in the movie the children also come, things like that. But yeah, the nostalgic feelings were still there, but honestly I think the movie is better. The next book that I read was Ways of Going Home by Alejandro Zambra. It's the first Zambra I read, and I enjoyed it. It is about the Pinochet era from the perspective of a child that didn't completely understand what was going on and why people were like so secretive and disappearing and spying on each other, and then eventually when he's adult he starts to understand what actually happened with these people that he knew in his neighborhood, and I think it was a very smart to tell this story, and I enjoyed it for that. So yeah, I'm looking forward to read more Zambra. Next book I read was Heartland by Banu Mushtaq, and this was the winner of the International Booker this year, and it's a collection of short stories about the lives of women in India, especially Muslim women. And the first few stories I really enjoyed, and after a while they started to blend together. It talks a lot about the position of women in society and in the home, but also outside the home, and how they are perceived in the bigger picture. And I think the writing was very good, and I understand why it got the prize and the recognition that it got. I'm happy that it did, but I would have preferred to read a single story from a single woman just longer. That's just my preference. Short stories are just too much work to get into one character just for 20 pages, and then you have to do it all over again. So that's just my preference. The next book that I read was The Covenant of Water by Abraham Verghese, and I read this because I did really enjoy Cutting in Stone by him, which I read probably 20 years ago, 15 years ago, something like that. And everyone was giving good reviews to this, so I thought I'll try it. And it was entertaining. It was about this family in India who had sort of a curse, so a lot of people in this family died drowned or in relation to water, and we see what this death and that kind of curse does to the people that are left behind. There's also like a subplot that merges into the main story at some point about this Scottish doctor going there, which there was also in the other book something about a white doctor going to somewhere in Kenya, I believe, and that to me felt unnecessary. I would have preferred this to just be this sweeping family saga about this family and the course of water, so those parts felt a little bit distracting. So as a whole, I'm not sure it came together, the book came together as much as I wanted it to, but I enjoyed my time. The next book I read was Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb. I read it from the library, but I had to return it, and it is a reread for me actually. I did read this book before, but I want to reread it so that I can continue on the series. And this was, I did not remember what happened as much as I thought I did. This follows a boy called Fitz, who is the bastard son of the heir to the throne, and at the beginning he just works in the stables and just goes around his life, and then at some point when his father dies, he is kind of called into duty from the royal family to be trained as an assassin, and they have this power called the wit, in which they can communicate to other people without really talking, and they want him to develop that so that they can communicate with him without having to it's like teleportation but for communication, so they don't have to be present to communicate with him, but he also starts developing that and using it to communicate to animals, which is like a thing that is really looked down upon. And so he's dealing with these two things, and then his father had two brothers. One of them is not the best, and the other one seems to be quite a lot more honest, a lot more solid morally than the other one, and so he struggles to figure out how to do the things that he thinks are right when one of them tells him to do something that he thinks is not right. So yeah, that's kind of the summary of that book. It's slow going, but I think I enjoyed it more this time around. It's still nothing like crazily amazing yet, but it is good enough that I want to continue with the series. So that's good, because I am continuing with the series. The next book I read was How High We Go in the Dark by Sequoia Nagamatsu, which is also for a book club, and this is like a post-apocalyptic world in which a pandemic kills a lot of people, and this pandemic especially affects children, and so there is this whole subplot about euthanasia of children, for example, because they don't want them to suffer when they know they are going to die anyway. And there were some sections that were really hard to read based on that. However, so this reads like a collection of short stories almost. There are recurrent characters, but you maybe read from that perspective from one chapter, and then 6 or 7 chapters later you read about them again, or about their ancestors or successors or like grandchildren. It does span a long time, and I was really into it at the beginning, the first third of the book, but as it went farther and farther away and we didn't continue with the characters that we had at the beginning, I started losing interest. I just thought it was an older book than it actually is, and in my mind I always think that the pandemic was just a couple of years ago, but it was actually 5 years ago now. So yeah, this was published after the pandemic, which makes sense. The next book that I finished is It Lasts Forever and Then It's Over by Anne de Marcken. And this is a fun book. This is about a woman who is a zombie, and she just goes through her everyday life. Like at the beginning of the book, she talks about how she has lost an arm and how that she feels about it, and how she lives in this community in which people are just trying to survive, and how they don't really remember their previous lives or their previous names, so they give each other names, things like that, like just very everyday thing, but just zombies. And it was very interesting. It was a lot of fun. It did remind me a little bit of I Who Have Never Known Men, in the sense that it is like this very post-apocalyptic, very out of this world kind of scenario, but it just focuses on the everyday and the minute things in life, not about the big things and the scary things. It's just very muted, but in a very crazy situation, and I liked it for it. The next book that I read is Murder on the Orient Express by Agatha Christie. It's my first Agatha Christie, and I didn't know what to expect, and I completely get why people love Agatha Christie. This was again a very fun book to read. It basically just feels like you're playing Cluedo. I didn't know at the beginning that was kind of the concept, so I think I would, if I read another Agatha Christie, I would make sure that I have the time and the concentration to actually try to look for the clues and try to solve the murder or whatever it's happening, because I think that's the point of them, and I didn't know that was kind of the point of them until I read it. But I think it was a lot of fun. I completely understand why people do these nights in which they solve a murder from one of the books and things like that. It's just it's designed to do that, and I think it was a very fun concept. I do think that the ending was a little bit of a cop-out, I have to say, but other than that, I think it was a lot of fun, and I might read some other Agatha Christie in the future and try to solve them, which seems to be like the thing to do with this one. So very happy that I read that. And then the last book that I read this month is Evenings and Weekends by Oisin McKenna. This is also for a book club. We haven't had it yet, it's in a couple of days, but I have already finished this book, and this is about a bunch of people living sort of around London, and kind of their struggles. We have Colum and Phil, who are siblings. Colum is about to get married, and Phil is just living in London by himself. He's a gay man, and he's in love with his roommate, and his roommate is in love with him, but he's also on an open relationship, and so there is a lot of discussions about polyamory and how that can be done in a way that fits everyone involved. And then their mother has just learned that she has cancer, and so she's struggling with that, and she's struggling with how to say that to their children, and like the relation. I think it often happens in families that it's a very familiar relationship and you feel safe with these people, but at the same time you don't often have deep conversations about life and death and things like that, and so it's still difficult to talk about those things when they are necessary. So she's struggling with that, and then we have this couple who are friends of these siblings, Ed and Maggie, and Maggie is pregnant unexpectedly, and so they are trying to figure out what they want to do with this information. And at the beginning of the book they want to move to the countryside, or not the countryside but like the suburbs, to because they think that's what they want, and yeah, but there's always that little thing in the back of their minds of, is this really what we want? And there's discussions about what they want and what happens with them, and there's a few other characters around them, but those are the main characters, and so we follow them throughout this. I think it's about a weekend or a week, in which a lot of the things that they are kind of internally struggling with for a while kind of come to the forefront, and they have to really solve them and confront them in a much more direct way. And I thought that the conversations that it's starting are very interesting. It's a very queer book, and that was very nice. I also think it did a very good job at integrating the housing crisis into the story and how that affects the everyday lives of people and the everyday decisions of people. I thought that was very well done. There was something about Irishness, because the mother of those two kids were kids like 20 something years old, but they are originally from Ireland, and so there's also conversations about Irishness and what it means to be Irish in England, and there's also a lot about London itself. A lot of people say that this is a love letter to London, and I liked all of those aspects. I also think there are some things that just were shoot into this book, and I don't know what they were doing there. There was a whale in the Thames for unknown reasons to me. I don't know why that was there and why the story needed it. I think it was just a very random thing to put in the book, to be honest. There was also at some point a conversation about one of the characters that is like immensely happy that the NHS exists, and then it goes into a ramble of a couple of pages about how important the NHS is and how they are a bit threatened to disappear or to be underfunded severely, and how that should not happen because they are doing such a great job. And I thought that was a completely random thing to put where it was. It was not integrated in the story at all, and there were a couple of other things like that were very not integrated in the book. There was also a couple of references for pop culture events, which I'm always hesitant to have in a book because it dates it very much, and I'm not talking about cultural things like, I don't know, maybe like talking about TikTok or phones or WhatsApp. It's like very specific things, like there was a point in which they were talking about Jamie Oliver and the show he had. I don't know why that was, like, it didn't add anything to the story, and it just dates the book in a way that I don't think it's very smart to do. But yeah, I think overall I appreciated some of the elements of this book, and I thought some of them were a little bit unjustified in a way. So it was an okay book for me. I think it was worth it, and I am glad I read it, if just for the conversation about queerness and uncommon relationships and adulthood and what that means, and the balance that you have to achieve with that, but I don't think it was a very perfect book by any means, so yeah, that was fine. And those are all the books that I read this month. Next month I'm planning to finish the Assassin's Apprentice Fits trilogy thing, and then I have a couple of other book club books that I want to read, so we will see how it goes. But I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know if you have read any of these books or you have thoughts on any of these books, and at the next video, bye!